Welcome to the newest edition of the Giants Huddle podcast. John Schmeelk with you today from CBS, and former NFL agent Joel Corry joins us. But first, I want to remind everybody that you can find the Giants Huddle podcast on the Giants Podcast Network, presented by Investors Bank, at giants.com/podcast, on the Giants mobile app, and on all your favorite podcast platforms. And now we welcome in our guest, again, a former agent. His name is Joel Corry, also a contributor over at CBS, and a brand new podcast as well. Joel, tell the folks about it.
Yeah, it's called Inside the Cap, where I do deeper dives into NFL contracts and the salary cap. The most recent episode was put up today. It goes over the details and gives some analysis of Dak Prescott's new contract.
And we will touch on that a little bit later on in the show. It is relevant to the Giants since it's in the division. But first, Joel, I was worried. We had scheduled this purposely right after the franchise deadline. Then we get the reports on Monday that they might push it back. And I'm like, oh, no, this whole thing might get screwed up. But here we are, which is good. The Giants did make a move today. They put the franchise tag on Leonard Williams. Your thoughts on their decision to do that and what it means for Williams and the Giants?
I figured they would put the second tag on him because they put the first one on, which was really a curious decision last year, given how Williams played the previous year. Had a career year, so it made a lot more sense to put the second tag on him. The big question is, what is that value ultimately going to be? It was the defensive tackle tag he was given and made this year. He filed a grievance to be classified as a defensive end, which for some reason has not been settled.
Do you know why that is, by the way?
I don't know. It should have. I would think he'd want to settle that thing before the second tag, but they're dragging their feet on it. Shouldn't be that hard to figure out. I remember when Jimmy Graham had one, they did it pretty quickly. They got the decision within weeks of when the hearing took place. But you're talking the difference of $19.35 million versus $21.345 million for the second tag, whether he's a defensive tackle or defensive end. Regardless, he's probably going to be looking at, hey, if he's a tackle, DeVaris Buckner makes $21 million per year. Chris Jones makes 20, Max is at 21. I'd 11.5 sacks. Neither one of those guys had double digits. I had 62 quarterback pressures. Neither of those guys topped me, so Leonard Williams is probably looking in that neighborhood.
So what do you think the odds are that they can work out a long-term deal? And really, to me, I know the deadline is July 15th, Joel, but to me, the more important date is March 17th, right? Because if you play on the tag, that's a really big salary cap number. But if you can get them on a long-term deal, as you know, you can move things around and get that first-year number down.
Yeah, you can have a very low first-year cap number depending upon your structure. If you do an option bonus, then you can have to keep the second year cap number down. And by option bonus, that's basically like a second signing bonus after the first year to exercise a later year in a contract. And then the cap numbers balloon. Right now, the Giants can't afford. They can't fit the tag of Leonard Williams. But they have till March 17th to get there. So getting a long-term deal done before then could potentially affect what they do, whether it's cut somebody or restructure contracts.
Now, the reason, obviously, you franchise him, you don't want him to hit that open market. If he was on the open market, Joel, what type of deal? I know you mentioned the DeForest Buckner deal as a guide. Is that what you're looking at? 5 years, $100 million, something in that neighborhood?
Yeah, you might go 4, but yeah, you're looking in that neighborhood. The question is, I think that the marquee players get paid in free agency regardless. Some may have a rude awakening, but for the most part, they will. But would you find a team who's going to look at 2020 is what Leonard Williams is because he finally lived up to that high draft pick, or are they going to look the other years and go, hey, but now the problem, that's not an issue for him. Dave Gettleman traded for him, put a tag on him last year when that seemed like it was an outrageous price. He lives up to the potential. Now you got to pay the piper. So since Gettleman is already in deep with him, he's probably more inclined to pay him than anybody else.
And the other defensive tackle the Giants have that's under contract, Joel, is Dalvin Tomlinson. Different type of defensive tackle than Williams, but really the best and most consistent run-stopping defensive tackle probably on the market. Do you agree with that evaluation first and foremost?
Yes. That the thing is, run stuffers are easier to replace than guys who can get to the quarterback. So that's why they're more expendable. And you had one who was the premier run stuffer a few years ago that became expendable. Snacks, Damon Harrison. So Tomlinson, I expect him to look at what Javon Hargrave got and DJ Reader got last year. So you're talking the $13 million per year neighborhood. You're talking Hargrave, you're talking maybe 25 million, 27 million in overall guarantee. So I expect him to try to target something like that.
Do you expect, I know you mentioned that you think even in this unique market, and we'll get more into that, the top guys will still get paid. You do consider Tomlinson to be in that class?
Yeah, in terms of what he does as a run stuffer. Yeah, so yeah, I consider him to be a marquee free agent for what you ask him to do. So he would qualify as one of those guys.
So you think he would be one of those guys that the first couple days, he's one of the guys that could go off the board pretty quick?
Yes, I anticipate that he will. You saw that last year of Hargrave and Reader, obviously different cap environment because we weren't having the cap potentially drop almost 20 million.
All right, so I guess this will be more of a broad question then, but I think it's a good place to start the rest of our conversation. If you're an agent advising one of your players heading into this unique free agent market, and for the fans that might not keep track of this, last year the cap was $198 million. Most teams plan years ahead. The cap this year is supposed to jump to somewhere, Joel, you would say around 210, right? Somewhere in that
Yeah,
area?
that's what people were thinking. 210 was going to be a decent estimate. And now you're going in reverse, potentially 30 million.
Right. So it's going to land somewhere between 180 and 185. Is that the same thing you're hearing somewhere in that area?
Yes.
So you're looking at about a $25 to $30 million difference. So if you're advising a player heading into this type of market, what are you telling them?
First thing is you have to tell a client what he needs to hear as opposed to what he wants to hear, or you're doing the guy a disservice. Sometimes agents don't do that. And part of the reason is they may not feel confident enough in the relationship. They may think somebody else is in their ear trying to steal them away. So they're afraid to do that and be candid. You need to be candid with the guy and set your expectations to be realistic, particularly this year because it's going to be a buyer's market. Supply is going to greatly exceed demand. You've started to see it. You're going to see more players over the next few days getting cut. There's going to be a glut of players available. So if you're not in the first wave, a top guy, then you could be in for a rude awakening. If your team asks you to take a pay cut, the agent needs to give an honest assessment to the player. Nobody wants to take a pay cut as long as it's reasonable and you have an opportunity to make some, if not all the money back you're giving up through not likely burned incentives. Then maybe you're better off staying put this year. This is particularly a year the grass may not be greener on the other side.
And it's funny, you brought me right to my next question because there are some reports out there about how the Giants might try to free up some more cap space. So this is an environment where you think players might be more amenable. You mentioned a pay cut. I'll use the term restructure. They're two different things. But this is a year where you think players might be more willing to restructure simply because if they do get let go, even under the terms of a restructure, you might be making less on the free agent market than you would make from the team you're currently on.
Oh, no doubt about that. That's what the calculus has to be. And what a savvy agent is going to do, and it's something we did years ago with John Randall. Minnesota wanted him to take a pay cut. So you have hypothetical conversations with teams about him being available and what the range might be if he should hit the open market. Now, when we found out that the Seattle Seahawks were willing to make him whole, it was a very easy decision since John was indifferent about staying or going because players get offended about a pay cut, particularly if you've been a marquee player more so than someone who's been a fringe player or has been a marginal starter. So it was very easy for him to go to Seattle, which was almost instantaneous from getting released. So the savvy agent's going to be out there surveying the lay of the land. If you get negative information where it's like, well, you're looking at league minimum or you're making $5 million, you probably can't find anyone who wants to pay you more than $2 million, and the pay cut is the $2.5 million, take the pay cut.
Now, for a guy that's on the last year of a contract, right, when you're looking at a restructure for that, obviously you could just take a one-year pay cut. That's one way to do it. The other way to do it, right, is to add extra years. So the restructure almost becomes like an extension. How does that work for the player and the team financially to help the team this year, but maybe then benefit the player a couple years down the road as the cap tends to expand, and obviously teams will have more money to spend?
Well, we saw a hybrid one of those pay cut restructure with Ben Roethlisberger, who was in the last year of a contract. He took a $4 million pay cut. Pittsburgh did something uncharacteristic actually $5 million pay cut. They did something uncharacteristic, which is they never add voiding dummy years to a contract. You can prorate a signing bonus over 5 years, and that includes the voiding dummy years. So he was 2021 final year of his contract. They converted everything but his minimum base salary into signing bonus, stretched that out over 5 years. So they're going to have, I think, roughly $15 million. No, it's going to be like $11 million in dead money next year from doing that. So that's one way to manipulate the cap. You're going to see teams do this year that they may not have been wanting to do or think they had to do in the past. One thing you may see with 1 year deals, that they could be a 3-year deal masquerading as a 1-year deal because you got the 2 voiding dummy years. That way you can take a signing bonus and prorate it over more years. We saw Levante David today signed a deal where he's got a low cap number. Tampa Bay typically does pay-as-you-go contracts. Cap and cash stay the same each year because they don't give signing bonuses. Huge departure. Gave a signing bonus, 2-year deal, 5 years on the books, three voiding dummy years. So you can stretch out the signing bonus over 5 years, keep the 2021 cap number down and keep it low. So that's something that you see teams more willing to do because of the depressed salary cap this year.
Don't miss out on your chance to experience a premier hospitality experience watching Giant games and world-class concerts in 2021 as a Giant Suite partner. Limited full-season locations are available or place a deposit for individual games. Call 888-NYG-1925 or visit giants.com/suites for more information. And Giant fans get a New York Giants checking account from Investors Bank with the Giants branded debit card, security features, and discounts at the Giants online shop. You can earn up to $250 when you open an account at investorsbank.com/Giants. Member FDIC. So, Joel, I guess to wrap up the Giants side of this then, do you see a way where they can retain both Tomlinson and Williams? And this is part A of the question. If Williams is on the tag.
If Williams is on the tag, that gets very difficult. If Williams isn't on the tag, it becomes a lot easier because
that was part B of the question, by the way.
Presumably he's going to have a low 2021 cap number. Then you could probably accommodate both. Then it becomes more of a cash issue than a cap issue.
And I guess, too, when you're looking at 2 interior defensive linemen, when it comes to cap building and roster building, how do you view that as you see teams kind of structure their salary cap throughout the league? You know, spending that amount of capital on 2 guys that technically I know they play the same position, but they're very different types of players.
Well, typically the hierarchy goes, and this is something I figured out early on when I got in the industry. First guy you pay is a quarterback. Second guy you pay is the guy that chases quarterback. Third guy you pay is the guy who stops the guy chasing the quarterback. So it goes quarterback, pass rusher, left tackle. That's typically the hierarchy. Run stuffers usually are lower on the totem pole. I put Williams as more of a more complete guy because he can't anchor the run, but has pass rushing ability. So those guys are more likely to get paid a premium as well because you rush the passer, you get paid a premium no matter whether you play inside, you play outside, you're a 3-4 outside linebacker, 4-3 defensive end. You get to the quarterback, they're going to pay you.
So you do think if they do manage to get Williams into a long-term deal before the 17th of March, that there would be potentially a way to keep both guys on board then?
Yeah, potentially you could. It's just a question of whether you want to allocate that much money to the interior of the defensive line. It's not something that teams will typically do.
Got it. That makes sense.
But you try to retain your best players. So if your best players happen to play those positions, that may be a different story. If you draft guys and they hit and that's where they are, then you're more likely to try to pay them. Yeah,
and then you have Dexter Lawrence coming down the pike too, who was a first-round pick a couple of years ago. So then that's something else I guess you would have to take into consideration. Let's kind of go down the list here of Giants needs, Joel. And the one spot where they are looking for some improvement is edge rusher. They had a revolving door at that position last year. 2 of the young guys got hurt, Lorenzo Carter, O'Shane Zimenez. And it's a pretty deep edge rusher class when you look at it. There weren't that many franchise tags at that position. How do you view this class? How many of these guys are going to get a chair in that first round? And maybe who could be left standing that might be, settling for that 1-year prove-it deal so they can try again in 2022?
I expect Shaq Barrett to get paid, Shaquille Barrett. He's not getting he wasn't franchised. Chris Godwin was. He'll get paid. I anticipate Matthew Judon getting paid. Yannick Ngakoue, this was a tough year for him. Wasn't all that effective in Minnesota after the trade. They traded him to Baltimore, and then the playoffs, they hardly played him. Maybe it wasn't a good scheme fit. Maybe things don't go well for him. a name which you might cringe about that could be a bargain guy for former first overall pick, Jadeveon Clowney. That's probably a 1 year prove it type of situation. Again, when he is playing, when he is at his best, he is dominant, but he disappears too much and is injured too much. So let the buyer beware. A guy which is interesting to me, Trey Hendrickson, literally did nothing for 3 years, didn't do enough to earn the escalator for to increase his fourth-year salary. Played that little. Then I think he was tied for second in the league in sacks. You don't expect him. That's a buyer beware guy, because who's the real Trey Hendrickson? What we saw in 2020 or before. Another guy you might be able to get on the cheap, Bud Dupree tore his ACL, was having a career year. People don't penalize injuries as much as they used to. Maybe in this cap environment, it reverts back to how it was in the past, but maybe he's doing a 1 year prove it deal.
How about Hassan Reddick? He was kind of struggling, Joel, to find a place his first few years in the league. He finally came out of his shell a little bit in Arizona last year. He was helped by the fact that he had all those sacks in that game against the Giants late in the year. How about him? Do you think he's a guy that'll land a long-term deal, or is he a guy that teams will say, all right, we need to see a little bit more before we're willing to commit to you long-term?
I think they're going to be a little bit leery. Well, one thing is you have to make sure that he's going forward and not going in reverse, because when they tried to make him a regular linebacker, that didn't work. Once Chandler Jones got hurt, he started rushing the passer. Then he looked like a legitimate potential star. Now, I wouldn't pay him yet because I haven't seen enough. And one thing that I did notice when I was an agent, you do well against a particular team, they may be one of your biggest suitors. The reason why I say that is I used to represent this corner that played in the division, Eric Allen. And Eric Allen had a knack for picking off passes against the Saints and return them for touchdowns. So I think he had 3 touchdown interception returns for touchdowns in a 2 year period against the Saints.
What was that, Bobby Hebert back in the day? Billy Joe Tom?
I think it might have been Steve Walsh.
Oh, okay, nice.
But the thing is, when he was a free agent, where does he sign? New Orleans Saints. So maybe the Giants were that impressed with Reddick because he had a potential great audition for them. But yeah, I wouldn't commit big money to him long-term yet. I'd make him do it again. Kind of like the Tampa Bay Buccaneers stuck a franchise tag on Shaq Barrett to make him do it again. He didn't have 19 and a half sacks again, but he still had consistent quarterback pressure and had 4 sacks in the playoffs. So I think Reddick may have to prove that it wasn't a fluke.
2 other guys in that class that I think are interesting. Leonard Floyd, who had his best sack year. Of course, he was next to Aaron Donald. I'm not sure if it's a coincidence. 2 straight years, you had 2 guys have career sack years next to Aaron Donald. That might not. I was just thinking
that. So that may be a problem because he was much better than he was with the Bears. That's another guy I would hesitate to pay. Dante Fowler did that and then went to the Falcons, and they were openly critical about his inability to get to the quarterback. At least the old regime was late in the year. So he may be someone that who doesn't get that huge payday as well.
And then how about Carl Lawson? You know, he's a guy whose numbers really haven't been super impressive since he got into the league. I remember prepping for the Giants. They played the Bengals last year, and I really thought he was impressive as a pass rusher. Is he a guy that maybe could get a multi-year deal, but maybe it's going to be more in that, mid-market area rather than top of the market?
He might be more of a Dante Fowler type guy. I think he ends up staying put. If Cincinnati likes you, they don't let you leave, even if they let you test the market. And I think they traded Carlos Dunlap for a reason, to make way for Lawson. So I think maybe he stays put. Question is, John start looking at older pass rushers as well? Because those guys, if you're in your early 30s, we know that market is kind of capped now by J.J. Watt. He signed a 2-year deal for $28 million as the base value, up to $31 million. You've got some guys who have been accomplished names that still have some ability, like a Justin Houston. Melvin Ingram was hurt last year, so maybe you look at one of those types of guys.
Let's stick on the defensive side of the ball, Joel, and it seems to me that the Giants could use a second cornerback, outside cornerback across from Bradbury. But looking at the market, this does not seem to be a cornerback class that's very deep. You got, what William Jackson at the top, but he's a guy that, like you said, if Cincinnati likes you, they're not going to let him leave. Richard Sherman's on the older side. Do you think some of these cornerbacks might get cut loose in the next week to fatten that market a little bit? What are the Giants looking at if they're trying to find another outside corner?
The draft. This is a weak year for corners. You also have Patrick Peterson, who's been great, but past year and a half or so hasn't been the shutdown Patrick Peterson we've seen in the past. Sherman's 33 years old and was injured. A guy that intrigues me, who hadn't been healthy but did play most of the year, finally, Jason Verrett. He's 30. Early in his career was a Pro Bowler, then had injuries for a couple of years, 3 years, barely played. When he's healthy, he's very good. I would not commit big money to him, but he may be a guy to take a flyer on.
Hey, Giant fans, limited Giants season tickets are on sale now for the 2021 season. In addition to ticket savings, membership benefits include access to exclusive events, experiences, pre-sales, and more. You can lock in your seat starting at just $100. Call 888-NYG-1925 or visit giants.com/tickets for more information. I think with the tags today, Joel, the thing that surprised me most is that Kenny Golladay was not on that list. I figured a team like the Lions would at least look, since they're in such a rebuild, and that's basically from the mouth of their general manager, that they would at least try to tag and trade him and try to get something back for him. But he's sitting there, and with both Godwin getting tagged and Allen Robinson getting tagged, I imagine Galladay's licking his chops here to hit free agency, no?
Yes, he should be, because those three guys are considered the top wide receivers. Two of them aren't on the market. He is. There are a couple teams with a ton of cap room that need a receiver. The Jets, for one. The Washington football team last year made a run at Amari Cooper, so they're probably looking to upgrade. And the Jacksonville Jaguars are another team, which I pegged as a potential spot for Allen Robinson. Since he left there, seems to have an affinity for them and would want to finally play for what could be a good quarterback, because he's been saddled with Blake Bortles, then Mitchell Trubisky. So I'm sure he wasn't all that thrilled to get the franchise tag, particularly since actually it doesn't matter, because it's going to be 120% of his previous year's salary. So his is going to be $17.88 million, whereas Godwin's is going to be $16 million. I was about to say he was going to have a depressed tag number, but no, he's got the 120% provision kicking in. But still, they had an acrimonious negotiation. He probably wanted to be out there in the open market, but Golladay should be doing cartwheels.
But it's still a fairly good wide receiver market here, Joel. That next group of guys, the Juju Smith-Schusters, the Will Fullers, the who am I forgetting?
Corey Davis.
Corey Davis, yeah, and then Marvin Jones too. What do you think the market is going to be for that group? They're probably not going to hit that top 18 to 20 million range, right? Where do you think those guys are going to land? I imagine Juju maybe a little bit more than Corey Davis.
I wouldn't touch Juju with a 10-foot pole for one reason.
Why is that?
We saw what he wasn't when Antonio Brown left. He was not a one. I know the quarterback situation wasn't great because Roethlisberger got hurt. This year, he was not a one. If he wants more than number two money, you can have him. Number two money is really the Sterling Shepard range, 10, 12 million per year. I assume he's looking more Cooper Kupp, Robert Woods, 1.5 money, 1A, 1B money, 15, 16 million per year. You can have him. All those guys are kind of flawed. Corey Davis, they didn't pick up the fifth-year option for a reason, has a career year. He was really the 2 to A.J. Brown's 1 over there, but still almost had 1,000 yards, great size, was a top 5 pick, has that pedigree. I think I would feel a little more comfortable with him because of the upside and the size. Will Fuller, you got the PED suspension and hasn't been able to stay healthy. Marvin Jones a little bit older, so they're imperfect guys.
Who are maybe some of the guys, you mentioned a couple guys that might get left without a seat at edge rusher. Who are some of the guys in this wide receiver class, Joel, that you think, come April 1st might not have a contract yet, and they might be looking for an opportunity to really step in as a primary target, which the Giants might be able to offer, depending on what happens in the draft, where they might be able to get somebody below market value?
Depends on how these guys price themselves. One guy that I think is going to have a tepid market, big name, A.J. Green. Hasn't been healthy. They franchised him last year. And then wasn't on the same page with Joe Burrow. Not very productive, not what you want when you're in your 30s. You haven't been healthy. A guy that intrigues me, not a number one receiver, Nelson Aguilar. In Philadelphia, it seemed like he was misused, was more of a possession receiver, slot guy. Raiders make him a deep threat, and he was what Tyrell Williams was supposed to be. Tyrell Williams was hurt all last year, got released, went to the Lions, which may have been part of the reason that Kenny Golladay was not franchised, but Aguilar kind of intrigues me.
We're seeing, Joel, last question on the wide receivers, and I've asked this question to a bunch of people. I've gotten different answers. We've seen the draft classes in wide receiver really now going back the last 3 years, including the one upcoming, have just been off the charts. 1A wide receivers going in round 2 in some of these draft classes. Are teams going to start to hesitate a little bit? As you mentioned it, right? Quarterbacks are 1, pass rushers 2. Then you get the tackles are 3. And then usually you get the cornerbacks and the wide receivers in the next group, right? Are teams going to start maybe laying low a little bit on wide receivers in free agency just because there are so many of them coming out of college that are really now stepping in and helping right away?
Yeah, it used to be that receivers, it had a 2-3 year period before they were really successful. Now they're coming in and they're producing right out of the box. So yeah, you're going to see that thinking start to shift. And the guys who are true difference makers or true number ones will get paid.
Sure.
And maybe they wait on the other guys because it always factors in. If it's a deep year at the draft, then you don't necessarily have to reach in free agency to get someone. And the converse can be true. If it's a weak class at a position draft-wise, that makes it better for the free agents because, well, we can't find one come April, so we better get one now in March.
If the Giants want to bring in a couple veteran offensive linemen to compete with some of the young guys and to push them, to make them earn those starting jobs, what's the swing tackle market, do you think, going to be? Is that still going to be where it kind of was before, where the Giants were with Cam Fleming? And I've seen a couple guards at the open market. If you're looking just for a solid veteran guard that, he's not going to be an all-pro, he's not going to make a Pro Bowl, but you can put him in there, you know what you're going to get. What type of cost level are we looking at for players like that?
Well, for this year in a depressed market, I think the swing tackle market may go down a little bit. For the guards, maybe the same thing. For not the marquee guards, but just your run-of-the-mill average guard, they make like $5-6 million per year. I don't know if they get that in this market. Maybe more $2-3 million, just because you're going to have a glut of people available. Because I can see teams doing this. I got X amount of money I'm willing to spend. If you don't take it, I'm putting a clock on you. I'll move on to the next guy. Somebody's going to take my offer.
Now, I've kind of referenced this already, Joel, and so have you. You're expecting a lot of one-year deals, I imagine. Are you also expecting a lot of guys signing in July? I think we expect a lot of the offseason to be virtual, or at least some of it, where now maybe guys might not be motivated to sign in April or May. Are we going to see a lot of one-year deals and a lot of those one-year deals maybe not happening until later on in the process?
A lot of one-year deals. It's going to depend on how quickly that the agent and the player shift their expectations once they see the market's not developing the way they want it to. In a typical year, which this isn't, if you don't sign in the first wave or second wave of free agency, you kind of wait. Some teams will sign a guy before the draft because it'll take away a need and you have to get in the draft. And then there's a lag time where some guys won't sign till right before the camp. Then some guys I'll wait for an injury. Yeah, waiting I don't think is going to really help you this year, particularly if you're going to pull the wait for an injury thing. Think you're going to create more leverage, not in a depressed cap situation. So I think it may be more some agents decide, market's not what I want. Am I going to do a mediocre long-term deal, or am I going to do the one-year deal and hit it next year and let me quickly make the decision because supply is going to be so much greater than demand?
That's interesting. A couple other items, and this I feel like is a bit of a softball because I think I know the answer as soon as I ask the question. Biggest franchise tag surprise today, Joel?
2. Cam Robinson, Marcus Williams. I didn't think the Saints had any way, given their cap situation, they could clear enough room, and they still haven't, to fit in a franchise tag. And Cam Robinson, inconsistent left tackle. Everyone was kind of like, Really? I know you got a ton of cap room. If I represent Cam Robinson, I advise him sign that thing today before they rescind it, because it's fully guaranteed once you sign it.
That was my big surprise too. I thought he would almost be a swing tackle candidate on the free agent market. He goes and he gets the tag, which I was surprised by. All right, Dak Prescott. You said your most recent podcast had a big thing on Dak. Give me the lowdown. What did you think of the contract? Obviously, they've been at this for a while. To me, the two things that stand out are the no trade clause and the inability to get franchised again after the deal. And I guess that's kind of what the Cowboys gave him for them to get that fourth year on the deal, right? Because last year the Cowboys wanted a 5-year deal, Dak wanted a 4. So now I imagine the Cowboys wanted a 4, Dak wanted a 3. So do you think that was kind of the trade-off there?
Oh, most definitely. I think that's the only way it gets done, where he's under contract through 2024, that you can't franchise him. And they gave him a $5 million fifth-day league year roster bonus in 2024. So presumably between those two things, you would want to get it done early offseason. I always thought if a deal was going to get done, the first digit in the average would be a 4, $40 million or bust. You got there. I was skeptical about Dallas really truly assessing the situation properly and realizing that he has us over a barrel and we pretty much have to concede every major aspect of the deal. I thought they got
there. It took them a while, but they got there.
I thought it would take them longer. I thought they would get there as the July 15 deadline for franchise players to sign long-term deals was approaching, and not before the deadline to actually put a tag on someone. It's interesting that Todd France's agent wanted them to use the second tag, so now they burned another one. So down the road, if he gets tagged by somebody else in the future, it's a 44% increase over a 20% increase, and it's his third and final tag of his career.
Yeah, this reminds me kind of an NBA contract, Joel, right? Where, you're making sure that your player is going to control his own destiny, where he's going to wind up after this deal, right?
Yeah, he had leverage and he exploited it, and that's what you're supposed to do in that situation. Jerry even acknowledged that he had leverage. He said in early January on a Dallas radio station, I don't know how Dak could have any more leverage. Yeah, that's because you let him have the leverage, because you dragged your feet on doing a deal, which if you had done going into the final year of his rookie contract when there were two guys making over $30 million per year or at that mark, Matt Ryan and Aaron Rodgers, you're not paying anything nearly close to $40 million. Russell Wilson wasn't even on the books, so at best you're like $32 million.
Now they got his cap number down. Do you think Dallas is going to be able to be active in free agency now, getting that first year cap number down, where they might be able to do something to add to their defense, which was obviously a huge weakness for them last year?
Yeah, they're in a much better position because they're $15 million better with the $22.2 million first-year cap number as opposed to what the tag would have been. So, yeah, they can be, but Dallas hasn't been major players in free agency first wave for a while. But I do expect them to go out and look at Dan Quinn disciples, people he's familiar with, just because that's the defense he's going to run, and familiarity brings comfort. We saw that was part of the reason J.J. Watt went to Arizona. Van Joseph had been someone he played for in Houston, so I wouldn't be surprised if Dan Quinn is looking at some Atlanta Falcons. He's going back to his old Seahawks roots. Maybe if KJ Wright's looking for Levante David money and Seattle doesn't want to pay it, maybe KJ Wright is in Dallas. Maybe Richard Sherman's in Dallas. So I would look for something like that. Those connections do come into play where someone has played for someone before.
We've seen Philadelphia be creative in how they do things before, and they've just kept re-signing their guys. They've had good rosters, but everything kind of just didn't work out last year for them. Is this, you think, Joel, going to be a bit of a reset offseason for them where they clean up some of the stuff that's built up on their cap over the past few years?
Oh, no doubt. It's a reset, because you're looking at Jalen Hurts and you're carrying $33.82 million in dead money for Carson Wentz, which I didn't think they would do, and he's in Indianapolis. Zach Ertz is going to be gone one way or another, trade or release. He'd prefer to be released. So Dallas Goedert takes over at tight end. You've already gotten rid of Deshaun Jackson. Alshon Jeffrey will be gone for post-June 1 designation. So will Malik Williams. So, yeah, I think they're hitting the reset button.
How about Washington? Right now we don't really know who their quarterback is unless Taylor Heinicke's one postseason performance, which was good, by the way. I'm not taking anything away from the kid. Unless they want to roll with him, they got to figure out quarterback. You might want to give him some help at wide receiver. You mentioned they kind of went hard after Cooper last year. And I think Washington is one of the few teams with a decent amount of cap space. They put the franchise tag on Brandon Sheriff, their best offensive lineman. How do you think Washington operates in the offseason here?
Yeah, they got to figure out who's the quarterback. I know some teams have been kind of waiting to see if the Raiders are going to release Marcus Mariota because he's got that albatross of a contract for this year of all those incentives where if he starts, he's going to end up making more than $20 million. So they'd prefer for him to get released or be willing to, if you do trade for him, rework those incentives. I know Washington football team fans would cringe, but one guy who has a connection to Ron Rivera, and we've seen that if you have a Carolina Panthers pedigree, there's a decent shot you end up in Washington. Cam Newton, what we saw last year, I wouldn't go that direction. If you're talking connection to someone in the organization, then I would be sniffing around Carolina to try to get Teddy Bridgewater since they're not sold on him. Scott Turner had him in Minnesota. So it'll be interesting to see what Washington does at quarterback. I don't think the starting quarterback is on the roster right now.
What do you think the next big domino is that's going to fall at the quarterback position? Are we going to see any movement on Watson anytime soon? The Russell Wilson noise is out there. If there's another scenario that I'm not thinking of, what do you think is going to happen at those two big quarterback spots as teams like the Bears and we talked about Washington, other teams as well, are still trying to find that landing spot for a quarterback?
I'm discounting the Russell Wilson thing just because from a cap standpoint, it doesn't make a lot of sense. That he's got a $32 million cap hit. You trade him before June 2nd, that's $39 million in dead money. Then who's going to play quarterback for them? I know they don't have any picks because of Jamal Adams trade. But Chicago makes no sense to me from a playing standpoint for Russell Wilson. I was surprised it was on the list. If you complain about your own offensive line, look at that one. I know Kyle Long come out of retirement, but that offensive line isn't any better than one you have. So I don't know what that trade would look like pre-June 2nd, just because what you have for the Bears that Seattle would want would be like Khalil Mack, but he's got like an $18 million salary. You add $7 million in dead money. So I don't know cap-wise if that would work. If there is a trade for Russell Wilson, the one that makes sense to me for what Seattle would want, and I don't think he's getting traded this year, but if there is one, it's really the Raiders because they have a good quarterback in Derek Carr. Their salaries match up pretty much. It's 19.625 versus 19. You could delay the proration from the future years, so you have 26 in dead money next year, and you really only have a $625,000 cap increase. Obviously, it's not a one-for-one trade, and more assets go back to Seattle in terms of picks, but that'd have to be a post-June 1 trade for that to make sense, but I still think he's there. In terms of Deshaun Watson, if he's not traded by the draft, this thing gets real ugly because Nick Caserio, if he's not getting picks this year to replenish what they lost in the Laramie Tunsil deal, then he's in it for the long haul. It's very easy for a player to talk tough in the winter, in the spring, once training camp rolls around and you're risking $50,000 per day in a fine, which can't be forgiven. They can start taking back your signing bonus if your training camp holdout lasts long enough. And then you start missing game checks. And if you take it out to its full extreme, your contract tolls because you don't play most of the year. We'll see if Deshaun Watson blinks first or the Texans if it gets to that point.
All right, 3 more questions, Joel. First one is this. How crazy, and I know we're looking ahead here, is the 2022 free agency period going to be? Because we're going to see the cap balloon, right? It's going to go up $30 million probably next year if it gets back up to over 200. You're going to have a bunch of players, to your point, are going to be on one-year deals, so you're going to have a lot of guys on the market. So does that incentivize the teams, in your opinion, that have cap money this year to use it this year in a depressed market? rather than wait until next offseason where we might just see the wild, wild west when all these players hit free agency?
Yeah, if you got cap room this year, it's great for you because there's some teams which won't have an ability to even be players or want to be players. The clock is also starting over on the minimum spend. It's now a 3-year period, 2021 to 2023, where it's 90% of the cap in cash. It's not each year. So you could not spend for 2 years, spend big in 2023 and be fine. So teams like the Patriots, the Jaguars, the Jets, considering it is a buyer's market, they don't necessarily have to go out and pay retail in the initial wave of free agency because guys are going to drop prices. You can potentially get some very good players that you wouldn't in an ordinary year in the second wave and third wave of free agency if you have a ton of cap room.
All right, give me an idea. Just, you don't have to mention names or specific players, but just what the flow is going to be like over the next, 10 days or so. We're recording this 10 days later. We're going to have the start of the negotiating period. Then you have free agency. Just what do you think? Give me some predictions or just to give the fans a feel for what the next 10 to 14 days are going to look like as the league year tolls.
Well, we're going to see up until March 17th when the league year starts, more people getting cut, which is going to add to making it more of a buyer's market. And then you're going to see once March 15th rolls around, you got the 48-hour pre-negotiation, pre-free agency period where you can negotiate. You're going to see a bunch of deals get agreed in principle then signed on the 17th. By the end of that work week, the first wave of free agency will be over by March 19th. Then you're going to see deals trickle in the next few days after that. Once the league meetings start, everything basically shuts down for free agency, and you're going to see deals being fewer and far between.
All right, finally, give me a little prediction. What do you think the Giants are going to end up doing, Joel? Guys they might bring in, what's going to happen with Williams and Tomlinson? Just your feel for how this might go for the Giants when they hit free agency.
I think they have sticker shock on Williams now, that franchise tag sitting on there, which is going to inhibit their ability to go out and be bigger players in free agency. Hopefully they'll end up getting one of these edge rushers whose market doesn't develop the way he wants it to.
Interesting. Joel, great stuff, my friend. Always great to talk to you. Enjoy this part of the offseason. I know this is your bread and butter. And again, just tell the folks where they can find your work.
Well, you can find my Agents Take column at cbssports.com. Tomorrow there will be one up on select offensive players where I set target prices, not necessarily what they'll sign for, but what they would be trying to get. Getting it and asking for it are two different things. And also my podcast, Inside the Cap.
Good stuff, Joel. Appreciate it. We'll talk soon, okay?
Sounds good. Thanks for having me.
That's Joel Corry, former NFL agent, again, CBS Sports, and check out his podcast as well. This was another episode of the Giants Huddle Podcast on the Giants Podcast Network, presented by Investors Bank, which you can find at giants.com/podcast on the Giants mobile app and on all your favorite podcast platforms. For Joel Corry, I am John Schmeelk. Thanks for being with us. We'll see you next time on the Giants Huddle Podcast.